As the Atari Video Computer System turned 3 years old in 1980, the installed user base of just over 1 million consoles had doubled to over 2 million. More consoles meant more gamers, and more gamers meant a growing demand for more games. Keeping up their established pace, Atari released just shy of a dozen new titles during 1980, and while some of their key talent had departed by the end of '79 to form Activision, 1980 would prove to be a breakout year with the release of what would become the console's first killer app. In this video, I'll be ranking every VCS game Atari released in 1980. That's next.
If you're a Gen X grown-up, this YouTube channel is just the beginning. Go beyond gaming with a casual and humorous take on movies, music, TV, tech, pop culture, and more. Hear the weekly Gen X Grown Up podcast anywhere you like to listen, or visit genxgrownup.com/pod.
Hey there, welcome back to Gen X Grown Up. I'm John and I am a Gen X Grown Up. Thank you so much for taking the time to click on this video. With sales of the VCS steadily on the rise through 1980, Atari had a tiger by the tail. They'd lost some rockstar developers over pay and recognition, but that would never come back to bite them in the butt, right? Meanwhile, Atari broadened its horizons in terms of inspiration. Sure, we still got a few new titles piggybacking on the popularity of real-world board games and sports, but 1980 saw a widening scope drawing on dungeon crawling, programming, and one notable arcade license. Now, if you've seen my previous ranking tier videos, you know that I try not to judge these now decades-old games with a 21st century eye, but rather through the eyes of little Johnny. In 1980, little Johnny turned 11 years old and was now a bona fide Atari addict, swapping carts with friends at the bus stop and getting together after school for Atari play sessions. My scores will rely on what he thought or would think about these games around the time of release in 1980. Okay, so going in alphabetical order, let's get this thing kicked off with 3D Tic-Tac-Toe. 3D Tic-Tac-Toe is no three-dimensional chess, but it will exercise your brain a bit and would make Mr. Spock proud. Take turns strategically placing your X's and O's within the 4x4x4 game grid in an attempt to get 4 in a row before your opponent. When playing against the computer, the level of challenge is determined by using Game Select. Now, like with chess before it, the higher the level, the longer you have to wait for the computer to make a move, up to 20 minutes or so on the highest difficulty. The difficulty switches, on the other hand, control who gets to go first and even allow for you to set up the board to play out your own scenarios. 3D Tic-Tac-Toe may not be too much to look at or listen to, but then Tic-Tac-Toe isn't exactly a high-tech game, so the layout is certainly appropriate and serviceable. Written by Carol Shaw of River Raid fame, 3D Tic-Tac-Toe is best played against another human, but pretty dry when waiting for the computer to take its turn. Fine in small doses, but nothing to write home about. 3D Tic-Tac-Toe will get this tier started with a solid middle-of-the-road C. Next up is Adventure. When Warren Robinette set out to write Adventure, his hope was to bring the computer text adventure Colossal Cave to the VCS with a graphical interface. Rather than typing take key or go west, he wanted the user to be able to grab the key and move west with the joystick in a realized fantasy world of castles and dragons. Now granted, your hero is a dot, objects flicker like crazy, and the dragons look like ducks, but for 11-year-old little Johnny, it didn't take much suspension of disbelief at all to visualize the magical world of adventure and become invested in the quest to return the chalice to the Gold Castle. Which, incidentally, is the goal of Adventure. An evil wizard has stolen said chalice and hidden it somewhere in the kingdom. Your quest is at all times challenged by 3 bloodthirsty dragons and an infuriating bat with a bad case of kleptomania. As you explore the kingdom, find keys to castles, a sword for dragon slaying, a magnet, a bridge, and, if you're truly adventurous, an invisible dot. If you know, you know. Difficulty switches modify the dragon's behaviors, and the 3 game options exist to give beginners a sample, while experienced players will always be on game option 3. And yes, we all know about that cool secret Easter egg, but that's just the cherry on top of an already delicious treat. Adventure, like Superman the previous year, expanded on the idea that a video game can be more than an electronic board game, but can set your imagination free and allow the player to explore a world and affect that world's inhabitants with your actions. If I had a rank higher than S, I would use it. But for me, Adventure on the Atari VCS is the very embodiment of top tier and gets a big, fat S ranking. I love this game. Okay, as we cool from the glow of the masterpiece that is Adventure, let's continue on with a cartridge that's not a game at all, basic programming. Basic programming is a bit of a weird one to rank. Every Atari cartridge up to this point was a game, or at the very least, education trying to pretend it was a game. But basic programming makes no pretense. This is a programming environment. Using the limited 24 buttons found on a pair of Atari keypad controllers and a clever set of overlays that gave each button up to 4 different functions, basic programming gave users a chance to write their own simple programs to run on the video computer system hardware. The screen is divided into regions such as program, stack, output, and graphics, and you can hide and display regions you currently need to see. Now, even with all this setup, the VCS is still a poor environment in which to program. Limited display area, even more limited memory, no ability to save or load your work, and clunky data entry means this is one of the worst environments in which to program in any language. However, we're playing Atari here, not doing taxes, so a program need not be practical or efficient in order to be fun. Now, I am well aware that these next sentiments may not resonate with everyone, but for little Johnny, who never owned basic programming but did fall in love with programming in BASIC years later with his Atari 800 home computer, the chance to type in your own programs and make the VCS do anything you could imagine, within reason, would have been a constant source of delight. If you're just here to shoot aliens and eat dots, no judgment. But if your Atari VCS was your latchkey companion and escape from the real world like it was for little Johnny, then you might be able to understand why I am going to place basic programming in the A tier of 1980 releases. With an asterisk. I mean, after all, it's not really a game. Up next is Circus Atari. Circus Atari is a game that's always puzzled me. At what circus do you see clowns launching one another from a teeter-totter to pop balloons 30 feet in the air? And is this the only attraction to see at the Atari circus? No jugglers, no animals, just daredevil clowns. All right then. In Circus Atari, you steer a teeter-totter with your paddle controller and use it to alternately bounce a pair of clowns skyward to pop 3 rows of balloons. Sounds simple enough, and the teeter-totter seems large enough to make this simple. But there are a number of caveats. Firstly, you can only bounce a clown from the empty side of the paddle or he splats on the ground, so now the target is half the size. And then, if you don't bounce on the very end of the totter, the next clown won't bounce high enough to hit any balloons. So the result is that you technically need to catch a falling clown at the very tippy empty end of the seesaw to make any progress, which also leads to a great many misses and splatted clowns, or a great many fruitless bounces. Now you can play 1 or 2 player and choose from a few variants, including a row of extra obstacles, but in the end, despite Circus Atari being a popular classic for the console, I always found it too much challenge for too little reward, and so it's gonna get a D. Moving on then to Dodgem. Dodgem is an intriguing game and one whose rules aren't immediately obvious and benefit from a read through the short manual. In a sort of mashup of a slot racing game and a maze game, Dodgem puts you in control of a car driving counterclockwise around a track, changing lanes to pick up as many dots in the road as you're able while avoiding a computer chase car running in the opposite direction. Use the button to accelerate when needed and tap the stick to change either 1 or 2 lanes at each intersection. Meanwhile, the computer car can only ever change 1 lane. Now you're given 3 heats to run the course and amass as many points as you can. With a second player, you can take turns playing the computer or let your opponent control the chase car while you gather dots. This is one of those easy to learn, difficult to master sort of games, which once you fully understand the rules will have you mashing restart a few times. But ironically, by the time you've figured it out, the novelty of Dodgem will have worn off. Bonus points for creativity, but with no progression or variation, Dodgem will get a C. That represents the halfway point of our list, and I'm going to pause here for just a moment to mention our store over at GenXGrownUp.com/merch, where you can get cool original designs on hats and t-shirts and mugs and pins and stickers. You can get those things delivered right to your door. It's the sort of cool thing you're liable to pick up somewhere, but if you'll pick it up from our store, not only will you get the cool thing you're looking for, but you will support independent content creation just like you see here on Gen X Grown Up. I get an email every time we make a sale and it makes me smile. I'm so grateful that you do keep us in mind. Okay, let's move along then. Pick up the tier where we left off with golf. 1980s golf, not to be confused with the previous release miniature golf, is a more traditional version of the sport. Golf features a 9-hole par 36 course where 1 or 2 players can work to achieve the lowest score. Positioning your golfer is somewhat puzzling at first. The club head will always point toward the ball, and you move your character around in such a way that his backswing is away from the direction you'd like to aim. The longer you hold down the backswing, the more power, and off you go. While a bit blocky, the course is well designed with holes featuring trees, roughs, water hazards, and sand traps. Of particular note, when you get on the green, the view zooms in for a better view of your putt to the cup. All things considered, golf is a welcome upgrade from the miniature version released just a year before, and I'm going to rank it as a B on our tier. Now on to Maze Craze. Maze Craze, or as its full title reads, Maze Craze, a game of cops and robbers, is a game in which you're a cop confronting danger and suspense as you and your opponent wind your way across the city blocks in an attempt to be the first to exit. Throughout the game, you may encounter armed robbers, blockades, or other obstacles to prohibit you from finishing your beat. Now, that description comes straight from the manual and describes a game I'd love to play, but it's not Maze Craze. Yeah, maybe if you squint a little, you're a cop and those are robbers, but the real description of the game should read something like, find your way through the maze and exit before your friend. On top of that are added a multitude of options, including number and speed of robbers, invisible portions of the maze, hunting versus dodging the robbers, taking damage, and more. I mean, look at this game matrix! Ultimately, it's all just lipstick on a pig, decoration on a game that, at its core, is no more captivating than the maze printed on the back of the Highlights magazine you were reading at the dentist's office. Variations on an uninteresting concept don't make the concept better, it just makes it more convoluted. With 256 games touted on the cover of the box, that feels like about 250 more than Maze Craze needed, and I'm going to sentence it to a D with no possibility of parole. Up next, Night Driver. Night Driver is the home version of the very rudimentary 1976 arcade machine of the same name. Using your paddle controller as the steering wheel and the button as your accelerator, wind your way through the glowing pylons placed alongside the track. Touch one at any speed and kaboom! The screen flashes and you lose a few seconds. Called Night Driver because you're driving at night and can't see a damn thing, apparently headlights hadn't yet been invented in 1976, that was convenient for an early arcade title with limited graphics capability, but for this port on the VCS, they chose to adhere to that technical design choice and leave the gameplay laughably sparse. You can choose from 4 predefined tracks or a randomized one and have a time limit or infinite play, plus a couple difficulty options like top speed and whether or not oncoming cars offer a courtesy honk. And that's it. Atari was absolutely right that we were hungry for home versions of arcade games, but they missed the mark when they chose to port a 4-year-old no-graphics tech demo arcade game to the console. Night Driver, Little Johnny owned you and played you on occasion, but if I'm being honest, that time would have been better spent. I'm giving Night Driver an F. And speaking of arcade conversions, we move on now to Space Invaders. Space Invaders for the Atari Video Computer System was the shot in the arm Atari didn't even know it needed, which helped to elevate the VCS from a kid's novelty to a must-have entertainment appliance. Space Invaders was draining quarters from pockets and arcades around the world, and the prospect of having the popular fixed shooter to play for free at home was borderline mind-blowing. Best of all, they stuck the landing. The reduction in fidelity that often comes with porting an arcade title to the VCS was more than made up for with the ridiculous variety of play options layered onto an already quality base game. Choices like moving shields, invisible invaders, zigzagging bombs, and more, coupled with a dizzying array of multiplayer options including standard one-on-one, simultaneous cooperative or competitive modes, one player moves while the other shoots, and way more. I mean, look at this game select matrix! To put it in terms that kids today might well understand but little Johnny would not, the arcade version of Space Invaders was the OG, but this Atari version is the GOAT. Different from the arcade in a number of ways, but ultimately resulting in an eminently more enjoyable and replayable game experience, Space Invaders is without a doubt going in the S tier. Just one more to go and it's Video Checkers. Video Checkers needs very little explanation. It's the classic board game brought to your Atari. Like 3D Tic-Tac-Toe earlier in this video, this adaptation of a tabletop game was also written by Carol Shaw ahead of a certain Activision river-themed masterpiece she would later author. The board and pieces are well rendered on screen, and you can choose to play the computer at one of 9 increasingly more challenging difficulty levels. Again, the screen will flash while the computer thinks you're up to 15 minutes at the highest level, or challenge a human opponent. The game will ensure you follow the rules and won't allow you to miss a forced jump. Sorry, cheaters. And as far as a board game on a computer goes, Video Checkers gets the job done. In the end, it's still just checkers, but delivered as advertised, so I'm going to give Video Checkers a B. That's it. That's all 10 cartridges Atari released for the VCS in 1980. And notice the standouts. Original concepts or ports of modern arcade titles lead the pack, while the model of reinterpreting board games and sports into the digital world would take a back seat. By the following year, Atari would get the memo that this was the direction the market was headed, and then, somewhat ironically, they would miss the memo years later when arcade translations were falling out of fashion, but that's another story. For now, with Space Invaders firmly installed as the game that made your uncle want to buy a game system, sales and popularity of the Atari Video Computer System would explode in 1981, so how would Atari answer the call with software offerings? Well, that's what I'll explore in the next video in this series. Meanwhile, I'll place links to some past and eventually future episodes of this type here and here. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this video, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.